Hello, and welcome to my Evelynn guide. I've played Evelynn since before her rework, and I've faced players of all MMRs from Iron to Challenger. Notably, I have gotten win rates of 80 to 90% on Master accounts, so I should know a thing or two about climbing on the champion. Here I will be trying to present what a beginner to intermediate player needs to know on her. On the screen now are timestamps if you would like to skip ahead. Let's begin with her abilities. Her passive is Demon Shade. This ability will heal us when we are below a certain HP threshold, like so. This HP threshold is determined by both your level and ability power, so it will scale later on in the game. After level 6, it will also grant us Camouflage. Her Q, Hate Spike, first shoots out a dart, which applies a mark to the enemy, like so, and then allows us to shoot spikes. What we must note here is that this allows Evelynn to play as a sort of mage, where I don't actually have to approach the enemy, but rather I can just cast my Q from a distance and use it to kite. Her W, Lure, is a spell which we can proc either with auto attacks or with spells, but not with smite and items. So when we cast a spell, it makes a little mark, which will count down, and if we proc it before the mark is ready, it will only slow the enemy. But if we wait the whole duration, it will also charm them. This spell is quite useful to deal with MR, so most of the time we will put some points into it because the range of the spell increases, which I can demonstrate here. As you can see, the range of the spell now goes past this turret, and if I max it out, it will go even further, as you can see. That is why I do recommend to put around 3 points into the spell, so that you can reach past some awkward angles where otherwise it's hard to charm the enemy. Her E, Whiplash, has two modes, Empowered and Unempowered. The Empowered spell is actually kind of worse due to the fact that the spell is a bit buggy. So when this champion decides to flash over a wall, say that I'm standing here and they flash over this wall there. This spell, it might just cast and just cancel, so it does not do damage. It might cast and then we follow the champion slowly, or it might cast, cancel, and then suddenly we teleport to the champion here. But the most common occurrence is for it to just cancel and not do damage. Though sometimes it will also cancel and do damage, but not follow. So the spell is a bit weird. It also has a bit of a cast time, so it locks you out of using other abilities. So I'm not the biggest fan of this version of it. Though the melee one, which is this one, the Unempowered Whiplash, this spell is a bit better, as you can cast it during your combos, between auto attacks, and so on, though it does do a bit less damage. Your ult, Last Caress, will make you briefly untargetable, after which you will teleport backwards on cast, like so. This untargetability is useful for dodging tower shots, avoiding Zed ult, avoiding, say, Diana ult, Cortis ult, and so on. Even Fizz ult. But the spell also does damage in the cone in front of us, but it is not the way that this is drawn, because if I cast it like this, it will still do damage. The cone is more like something like this, where it goes a bit behind the champion and it makes a little bit of a triangle, and it goes pretty far like this. Anyway, the other thing to note with the spell is that when you are tower diving, if you hit the enemy champion with the spell and you kill them, it will not reset tower aggro. You will still have aggro, so what you have to do is either miss the ult to reset aggro if you're tanking the tower, or you have to make sure that you ult out of the range of the tower. So as for items, let's begin with the mythics. On the screen we have Everfrost, Rocket Belt, Harvester, and Crown. I already wrote a short description of each, but I'll explain more in depth now. For Everfrost, I see its usefulness in games where you want a cheap build, where you want to just CC a target and make them unable to play. Think, for example, Echo. If you CC Echo with Everfrost, he cannot ult, and he is most likely just dead. If you CC Tryndamere with Everfrost, he is most likely very annoyed, especially if you do it during his ult. And in games like that, it can be useful. I wouldn't really recommend going it until at least Master, as I don't think there is a need for a situational item like this before it, but I think it's fine. Rocket Belt is generally the most popular item, as the damage numbers are going to be the highest due to the item having Magic Pen. The item is also pretty consistent in snowballing due to the dash, but it has a drawback in the dash itself, as the dash slows down your combos. It can be awkward to use, especially later on. It will make you lose damage when you want to combo someone quickly in some scenarios, and it's just slightly worse at carrying than Night Harvester due to the longer ult cooldown and oftentimes single target damage nature of Rocket Belt. This is a build that you will most likely go for if you just want to kill 1 or 2 people and move on, which is honestly fine. Harvester is also another fine option. It has, in my opinion, the best carry potential if you get very fed, as with this item you can actually kill pretty much everyone in the enemy team solo. The reasoning being, firstly, that your ult is up more often, so there's less of a window for the enemy to get to you, and also more of a window for you to one-shot them. At the same time, it also benefits your Q, as whenever your Q is done being used, or rather I should say, whenever you finish using the spikes, the dart will be back up and you can use Q again. Crown is our last option, but I wouldn't recommend Crown for anyone really, as it's more of a crutch and it makes you worse at the game, because you start relying on it and then you can't play anything else. I don't think it's very useful either in most games. Now we have 4 items that are basically mandatory, though the last one is debatable. Anyway, Void Staff is an item that you will buy in most of your games. The fact is that with the durability patch, you have more MR on the enemies. They already had a decent amount of MR from levels, and it's unlikely for people to ever not go at least mercs into Evelynn when you're fed. Even if you're solo AP, oftentimes people will go MR, so this item is going to be pretty much mandatory in most of your games. The second item is Ravenous. This one is just self-explanatory. It gives you so much value. You have high AP scalings, so there's never really going to be a game where you don't want it, though it might sometimes be delayed due to the way that gold income is going to work out. Magi is an item that many consider mandatory. I would say it's near mandatory. It's probably the best carry item, as it gives you the most value for little gold. But in some games where you are trading kills back and forth, or maybe you want to take a risk so you can carry harder, this item can be a bit questionable. Though in games where you're either very ahead or very behind, it's usually really free to buy it. In those games where the game is pretty close but your team is doing fine, you can sometimes circumvent it, you can go for something else, and then you can get Rabadons, and it's gonna be fine anyway. It's actually going to be better if you end up dying, so yeah. Some people might say that's a skill issue, but I think some champs it's going to be very hard to avoid dying to. Lastly, we have Banshee. This item I think is the most standard item to go out of the situational items, so I put it here. This item is going to help you a lot against some champs where you just can't really avoid their CC unless you play in a very specific way, and playing in that way will oftentimes limit your options. So if you're fed, I just say it's fine, you can go this. Just don't use it in too many games because it can become a crutch, and if you're unable to play without it, at some point you're going to face issues. Final two items that we have are Shadowflame and Lichbane. Lichbane is an item that you only really use if you need to overkill a champion. This especially happens with champions that have either a heal or a shield. So think Echo or Tryndamere or something. Or you can also think of stuff like Sterak's, Gargoyles, Shield Bow, etc. Against these items and champions, it can help a lot to have this flat proc rather than to have more AP. Because most of your, well, a lot of your damage before you ult is going to end up being percentage HP damage. But champions with either heal or shield don't really amplify that damage that much, especially when you buy AP. And if you invest most of your damage into percentage HP, against these champions you can sometimes struggle. So this can be pretty good. It's probably the best last damage item. Meanwhile, Shadowflame is an item that I only really would ever use as a replacement for Medjay. But you wouldn't really want this often, it's just when you really can't go Medjay, because say that you're going like 3 and 3, 4 and 4, 5 and 5, Medjay isn't going to give you a lot of value there. So in those situations, this item can be fine. And after this item, you just go Rabadons and you play kind of like a mage, because mages often go some kind of mythic, then Shadowflame, and then Rabadons. As for the other items, I wouldn't really go them. Zhonya is an item I know some people try to go, but that item is only really useful in, say, like 1 out of 50 games or 1 out of 100. You're really forced to buy it when you're against, say, like Talon or Rengar or something, and you really don't want to trade ults with them, and you can't really kill them, but they're the only real issue for you. So if you can avoid that with Zhonya, it can be okay, but it's very situational. Wouldn't really recommend buying anything else though. I guess some people also would consider Morello. That item is only useful against Rengar. I guess Oblivion Orb can help you kill him, but Grievous Wounds is kind of not very good since it only gives you 25%. But as I said, if you're against Rengar and you really want to kill him, I guess you can go that. Next up we have runes. For runes, I think that most of the rune pages that people play are fine as long as you have an intent with them. So the rune pages that a lot of people play are, say, Electrocute with Inspiration, going something along the lines of this. There's also an option of going Futures Market and Magical Footwear, and that's fine. This is more of a setup that allows you to scale into the mid-game. In the mid-game to get your boots faster, to finish your 3-item spike faster, which would be something like Sork's, Rocket Belt, and Medjay's, after which you would simply try to kill enemies and snowball. The other variation of the Electrocute page is the Sorcery page, which a lot of people like, where you go Absolute Gathering. Also fine, no real issues with it. The only thing I would mention here is that if you go this page, then most likely you would play for something like a Sork's Rush, because with this page, the main advantage you have is that you have some extra AP. So if you rush Sorks, you can be faster, you can have a bit more damage, you can have a bit of a better early game, but your minute, say 15, is going to be a bit worse because you don't have that 300 extra gold from Magical Footwear and maybe like 200 from Futures Market and whatever. The next page that some people play is something like this, where you either go Domination or Sorcery second with First Strike. This is fine, though it's a bit more Feast or Famine sometimes. due to the way that this works, because sometimes you miss out on kills due to not having electrocute, while other times you get the kills anyway, and then you suddenly have a lot more gold income and you snowball out of control. I think all three of these pages are fine. Or well, I guess I should say 4, since here you have domination or sorcery second. With sorcery would go something like this. I think all of these are fine as long as you adapt your playstyle to what the rune page represents, where with electrocute inspiration you would try to farm a bit more, scale up, and then snowball in mid game. With electrocute sorcery you would try to go Sorks and then snowball a bit earlier, and with first strike you would try to get to 2 items as quickly as possible, and then just try to combo everything and generate as much income as possible. I will now try to present the basic builds and spell order. So you're always going to max Q, and then you have a few options. You can instantly max E, you can instantly max W, or you can put like 2 or 3 points in W and then max E. These are basically your options, which I would recommend. Maxing W is mostly useful when you need more CC duration, say against champs like Echo, but 5 points in W isn't really going to be necessary against almost any champ. 5 points in E also not that necessary because it only gives you a bit of extra flat damage. So my preference is something like this, if you can be bothered to get used to it. If you can be bothered to getting used to it, I guess. The reasoning is, as I showed before, because W gains range whenever you put points in it. So if you put 3 points in W, then it reaches past some turrets, past some walls, and it makes it a lot easier to confuse your enemies, where they will think that you have to be in a position that you don't actually have to be in. Because if you have extra points in W, then it's sometimes surprising for people what angles you can actually be in. Because if you put all of your points in E, then your W is just short range, and you're basically forced to stand in some kind of a spot often from where you can cast W. But with a few points, it's not. It also gives you some extra magic shred and some extra CC duration, which is all fine. But you can play with any of these and climb, so it's up to you what you do here. As for builds, as I said in the rune section, you are going to go for Sorks if you have electrocute and sorcery. But if you don't have electrocute and sorcery, then you're not going to be able to rest Sorks, so you're just going to be prioritizing raw AP. So you're going to get Mythic plus Sorks, because you're gonna get them from magical footwear at that point, plus Magi, or alternative if you go for Shadow Flame. Then after this, you have a few options. So it's going to be either Void, if enemy has a lot of MR. It's going to be Rabadons in most games. Rabadons is just the most consistent, most damage, it's gonna make you one-shot, whatever. And then you have like Banshee. Banshee is gonna be the item you go for when all you really want is to make sure you don't lose Magi stacks, when you just want to go on a champion that's kind of annoying to go on, like say Syndra or whatever. Syndra's meta at the moment, and against Syndra, Banshee can help you quite a bit. Though it won't block her QE if she hits her Q on you, so be aware of that. It will only block her instant E. And then like Lich Bane if you're a for fun player, I guess. Because there isn't really a point in going Lich Bane before Rabadons. So I'm not really going to talk about this build path. So we have these 3 build paths. So if you want Banshee or Void, then most likely your next item is going to end up being the other one. So either Banshee or Void. The reason for this is because you already went for one of these cheap items, and Yeah, I mean, I I guess if you went for Void, you can also go for Rabdons. You have the option here. But if you went Banshee right after Mecha, you're most likely going to go for Void next. Because the items are both cheaper and it's going to just make you spike faster. You also don't really go Banshee unless you already have enough of a lead in Magi stacks. And most likely you're gonna have to deal with MR, and having Void as 6th item is pretty questionable often. Though you can still go Rabdons here if you really want to. Here, Banshee or Rabdons, and then most likely just one of the items, it doesn't really matter. Lichbane, Rabdons, Banshee, one of them. If you want Rabdons though, now you have pretty much the most options at this stage of the game. Because now, if you really need it, you can go Banshee still, and you shouldn't be lacking damage. If you really need it, you can go Void, and if you need it, you can go Lichbane. So if you're lacking damage, you can go Lichbane. If you're not lacking damage, but the enemy is building MR, you can go Void Staff. And you want to keep your power curve good, right? So you don't want to be forced into Void Staff later. Because the issue with going Banshee or something first, and then going Void Staff here, is that if I go Banshee right after Rabdons, I'm going to, at some point, before I finish my Void Staff, but after I finish my Banshee, be facing MR trouble, right? Because the enemy can buy 100 MR, say, and if they buy 100 MR, I'm actually going to sometimes have issues, and then I'm going to need to wait until my Void Staff is finished so that I can deal with those issues. So that's something to think about in those situations. Meanwhile, if I go Void Staff first, then I can go whatever I want last, because I don't really have that issue, so whatever the situation calls for. And with Lichbane, I have a similar issue, kind of, because I'm forced to go Void Staff after. I'm unlikely to have a damage issue now, but I can have a defensive issue where now I've committed to Lichbane and I can't really get Banshee anymore, so that can also be an issue of sorts. But this is why Evelynn's builds are really linear. As for other items like pets, for jungle pets, you can go red or blue. I would say that blue is probably the best one at the moment to go, but red is also fine. You can go either one really. Can be kind of up to preference, but yeah, I don't know. Doesn't really matter that much. The trinkets, you're going to want to sit on yellow trinket as long as possible in the early game. So level 1, you're going to ward, or if you're not warding level 1, then you're probably warding level 3. And if you play against something that's really free, you still don't go sweeper, you mostly just hold on to your ward, and then at level 4, when you're done with your full clear, say you play against like Zac, you don't really need to ward against it, so you hold your wards until level 4. At level 4, you're most likely going to end up, after Scuttle, being able to ward 2 times. So you can ward like his entrance, and you can ward a lane or a camp or something. And if you can place 2 wards at level 4, it's going to be really impactful on his second clear. Because half of the map is just lit up for your team, just by you. Sweepers are fine also. They're pretty useful, especially... They become especially useful when you get level 6, because before 6, usually you can keep track of where the laners are, and if you're looking at the minimap, then you can see if someone warded or not. But after level 6 is when you're going to want to maybe consider Sweeper for mostly the information that it gives you when you want to gank. Because you can first of all sweep your camps in case the camp is warded, so that you don't walk from a warded camp and show where you're walking, which can be really disgusting. But that won't really happen in lower elos. But the other one that can happen is you can use Sweeper and it won't show pink wards, and it also won't show that you saw the pink ward, but it will give you the outline of a pink ward in a bush. So for example, if you're in bot lane and you walk to the tri-bush, behind the wall you can stand and you can sweep, and you will see that there's a pink ward in that bush. So if you made that mistake, then you can walk around and you can walk through the lane and try to gank from there. So that's something to consider. It can be pretty niche though, so the most used ones are going to be yellow and blue. The blue trinket we just swapped to at level 9, and unless you situationally need the other ones, you won't really swap back. Most of the games you can sit in blue if you want. As for pink wards, these ones, you can buy one pink ward before Mythic, but not more. Buying more than one pink ward is just going to stunt your economy, which is going to be annoying. And after your Mythic, you just make sure that you have a pink ward in your inventory whenever you base, if you're fed, and then you just use them in fights. Don't really use them just randomly for vision, but for example, if you're fighting for dragon, you put them in a bush that you want to make sure is clear, that the enemy can't get vision in there, that the enemy isn't in there, whatever. Or you use it when you need to get vision yourself, or you want to W, or you want to steal the dragon, or whatever. So this is how you approach these items. I will now try to demonstrate what the thought process would be while you're doing your first clear on the map. So we will begin by just doing a leashless, let's say red start. Okay. So we will be doing leashless red start, and we will just look at the lanes while we go, and I'll just say what I think options could be here, right? If we had laners. So we just pulled the camp. We don't really have to look too much when we do our first camp. It's not really needed. Just kite a bit, and it's fine. After you finish your first camp, you want to start looking at the lanes. So you look at the lane that's closest to you, and you look at mid lane, for example. Okay, and then we make sure we use all of our spells. And while our spells are down, we can have a quick glance. Okay, cool. That was cool. Great. We got a quick look at the lanes. Now while we walk again, we can look at the lanes, we can see, okay. In this span of time, I can also see if the enemy mid laner walked up to my raptors to ward them, like if you walked here into river to ward river against me, if you walk top side to ward, and so on. At this point, I can now decide to either gank mid, or to proceed with my clear, or to gank top. That's why we want to look at every lane and decide, and then we can take W if it's needed. So in this scenario, let's say that there's nothing for us to do, we just relax. Okay, it's fine. We just do our next camp, look at the lane real quick, look at the other lane. Okay, now we won't really stop clearing here, because we have 2 points and we're kind of committed. So what we're doing now is just trying to finish our clear as fast as possible. So we just look, so that we know what will happen, and what we can expect when we do get on the map. Because our clear will be done soon, right? So when our clear finishes, we want to know, is this pushed in? Is this pushed in? Can we contest scuttle? Should we just base? Should we gank? Like, what should we do? Let's say in this scenario that the enemy jungler did something like, I don't know, he just did like some camps, and then he like walked bot lane, and he ganked bot lane. Or maybe he's like still bot lane right now. We could now just invade his camps. But let's say that he didn't do that and he just cleared, and he's now bot side. Okay, so we do our scuttle, and then we look, okay, is there anything mid? Is there anything top while we do our scuttle? And then let's say that this top lane, rather than this being our laner's wave, it's like the enemy's, right? So the enemy is like pushed like this. So we can maybe walk like this, right? Like, let's say that the wave is like here and the enemy is there, right? We can just walk like this, and if this isn't warded, we might get a gank off. If not, we can also try mid. We can also look for his raptors, we can look for his krugs. If nothing is up, no camps, no gank, okay, no problem. We base, we buy our items. The best items in this scenario would be something like this, and we just walk to our next camp, and we just clear again. If you were to have more gold, so say that you had enough gold for something like this, that's fine. if you then have enough gold for this, which is slightly more. So this costs you 850 and 435, so 1285, I guess. And then Dark Seal, if you can afford all three of these, then you just go for this, right? Because this is going to be better than an alternator without extra AP, because this is 60 AP and this is going to be 25, which is not the best. Even Blasting Wand can sometimes be better than alternator, but I would say that you can just go for alternator because it gives you a bit more HP, a bit easier to play, and the burst early is going to make it pretty much equal if you don't get an amp tome with the Blasting Wand. Your other options can be something like this, but this is pretty pointless because you can just get the Blasting Wand. The next thing that we can go over is warding. So let's say that you are this blue jungler right here, and let's say you're starting on red buff, and you play against, say, Rengar or Graves or something, right? So this is going to be a bit problematic for many of you, I suppose. So these champions are going to have different ways to answer their clears and different clears you want to do and different ward spots and whatever else. So we have to group up these champions and what they do. So the champions which can easily hop over Dragon and Baron wall, think Graves, Kindred, Nidalee. Yeah, I'm forgetting someone, but okay, let's say those for now. Against those champions, you're usually going to want a ward around here somewhere, in the river. These wards in the river will allow you to see if they have hopped over your camps or not. So this is usually going to be done on the side that you don't start on, and you can either ask your teammates or you can just ward this late. So if I were to ward against like Graves, I would probably ward at like 115 or something, or 110, and then I would just run from here to my red buff, if that's what I'm going for, right? Against these champions which really like to invade, you're also going to ask your teammates to ward. So if you're warding like this against Graves, then you're going to ask your teammates to probably ward like somewhere like here, for example. If your teammates are warding here, then maybe you will ward somewhere around this area. Though this will depend on what you expect the enemy to do. Because if you expect the enemy to go from their blue buff to your, I don't know, red buff or Krugs or something, then you're gonna have to ward here, but this isn't really something that you should expect, because honestly you can just walk away if that happens. Because if they take one of your camps, like say you did your red buff, they did their blue buff, and then they ran here, then you meet them at your Krugs, like you can just walk away. They either do your Krugs or they don't, but if they don't do your Krugs and they chase you to Raptors, okay, I just walk away, it's fine. And now the issue for them is that they need to have vision here, because if they don't have vision here, then you can probably walk like this and try to take their Raptors, in which case they're gonna be forced to walk here, which is something you can do anyway. And when you see them walk here, you're either going to manage to take the Raptors, or you're just going to back off, and you can basically manage to make them not take your camps, because instead of taking your camps, they just ran here, which is something that you can go for. Otherwise, if they decide to just stay and do this Krug camp, you just do Raptors, and then you can just clear, and it's gonna be fine, honestly, because their sequence is really messed up, because they went like this, and now what can they do? They have to either gank bot lane or walk back to Cromp. Like, what is that? Or they walk like this and go protect their camps. But in that case, they just left these camps up, so this is honestly going to be fine for you most of the time. So I don't really consider this an issue. So the wards we're going for are on the opposite side. So if you start on blue buff, then here. If you start on red buff, then here. And then after this ward, we're looking for a ward, say like here, because this ward will avoid Sweeper if they late invade or whatever else they make up as an invade. Because the biggest threats to you right now are 1, them, level 2 invading you, like this or something, and 2, them level 1 invading you, like here. So if we can prevent both of these against champs like Nidalee, Graves, Kindred, whatever, we're already pretty happy. Rengar is a bit different because he doesn't jump over this wall. So against Rengar, this is going to be huge because we don't want to get level 1 invaded. But the other big thing against Rengar is that we really want to show up on our top side before he does. So clears that I would consider are, say, reverse clearing. So you do something like red, blue, Gromp, Wolves. In this scenario, you can choose to either leave this plant up or to take it. I usually would take it and I would ward this push, and then when the Rengar player does, say, his tree camp and he decides to invade you, and then he tries to blast cone over it, the blast cone is gone, but he can still commit for it because it's already a committed play, because him walking away right now would mean him walking like this, which is just a really long walk. So in most cases he will just walk like this, but by the time that he gets like here, you're already going to be either done with wolves or finishing them, and you should have them pulled like here. So in this scenario, you're pretty safe against this kind of level 3 invade. A level 2 invade can still be kind of scary, but I'll be honest with you, I've played against Rengar so many times and I have not seen someone do something like this and then just sit on your blue buff at level 2 once, I think, in my life. So I wouldn't really expect this, honestly. I mean, if that happens, it's gonna happen once in 100 games, so it won't really affect your elo. The next option, or well, the other one is something like, you can do like this option, where you do these 3 camps and then you go like 4 or 5. The issue here can be that he shows up when you are on Grump, but most of the time it's going to be fine, because, or you just do like, if you want to be extra safe, you just do this, you do 4 Grump, and then you do like 5 Wolves or something, and you just skip around blue buff. You also make sure to take this plant, so shouldn't really get caught off guard here. It's fine. This works also. You're gonna ward still, like somewhere like here, and you're going to ask your teammates to ward level 1, so you don't get level 1 invaded. The last option as to what I would do is something like this. You can do like this level 3 path that a lot of junglers did, then just go here and here, and you're still going to be on wolves at the time when he shows up. So this ward will spot him, he will walk somewhere, and he's not likely to see you on wolves unless he checks them. So after that, you have the option of going somewhere here. But the main issue with this path is that if the Rengar player actually realizes that the way that Rengar wins against Evelynn is by full clear, then he will be done with full clear and he will be here, and you will be like this. And now you do this and you're camped down for free, and it can be a bit annoying and kind of pointless. So that can happen. Another clear against Rengar, and the last one that I'm going to mention, is something like starting Sweeper, and then if the enemy laners aren't very strong, level 1 say, you can try to cheese him by just going like this, sweeping here, and if you're not spotted, then you can just start on his wolves, and if you start on his wolves, you just do like 1, 2, 3 or something, and after this, we just do your camps, though this is quite nerfed because this season invading is a bit worse early on. Not worse in terms of reward, but worse in terms of time efficiency, because it's going to take you forever to do these camps as a level 1 and 2 champion. But I suppose you could still do this. The other champions that can be annoying are the champs that can switch up their clears a lot. For example, Elise, Jarvan, Ivern, those types of champions. Against those types of champions, I would highly prefer to have some kind of aggressive ward. So, for example, here, or on their camps, or well, their buffs, I would say. Or at least somewhere. close to their side, so past like this imaginary line. If we split the map in half, then I wanted to be on their side, right? So I would be looking for something like that against these champions. And I think that's about it for them. Another creative ward that you can use is warding somewhere over here through the pit. For example, level 1 warding here. This can be pretty useful against champions who try to do some kind of a 3-camp gank into bot lane or top lane if it's on this side. So if they walk like, I don't know, they do something here and then they decide to walk like this, it's going to be very annoying for them because it's also unlikely for them to sweep. But this isn't that important. The most important thing to learn on Evelynn are defensive wards. So this ward, these two wards where you have to make sure that it sees to this pit entrance and it has to see here also. And the same thing here, it has to see like here and it has to see like the pit entrance. So you would ward somewhere like here. And maybe like some kind of a ward like this where you do like some kind of a different clear and then you try to spot the enemy jungler if he's actually invading you later on. So this is against level 3 invades. And this should be about all that you need to know about warding of this champion for now. Now I want to speak about clears. So if you're below at least diamond, then I would just suggest to do a full clear every game. Honestly, even if you're a diamond and you're looking for master, you could still do that because it's not really going to hold you back too much. Full clearing every game on your first clear, like this, is going to be fine. You can also do like blue start or whatever, but it doesn't really matter. The important thing is to focus on getting yourself ahead, to path to the lanes where the enemy is more killable for you, you have better CC, better setup, you think you will get ahead on. Because if you can get kills, then you can carry most games. So the plan is to do something like this. Obviously, as I demonstrated before, you want to still look at your lanes. Perhaps sometimes you're going to switch it up and you're going to maybe like gank early on if you might get a kill. If you think it's very, very likely, and if it doesn't work out, then you'll learn something and you'll figure out why it doesn't work. And then you can either stick to full clearing or you can adjust that. Obviously, these clears where you do 3 camps and you go bot lane and then you get double kill can be very good. They are very rewarding, but if you find that these don't work at least 90% of the time for you, then I would just stick to full clearing because full clearing is just consistently going to work out for you anyway. So after your full clear, as I said, you look for some kind of a gank, you look for scuttle, you look for enemy camps, whatever. If you got any of these things, even just a pressure gank, like you can just go in, just CC enemy, damage them a bit, soak up some XP, whatever, you should be able to, on your next clear, at some point, get level 6. Either once you clear your camps, or once you do like another gank or whatever. Either way, you should be able to get level 6. With this level 6, you are now at a stage with Evelynn where you're actually in the game and not just like a little minion that walks around the map and tries to get a random lead because enemies are too bad to respect it at all. Now, your options expand a bit. So now what we're looking for is to still gank, obviously, and to use our ult, because whenever we have our ult, we want to use it because it's a large part of our power budget on our champion. But now the options also expand to something like invading. So you can invade, especially if you got kills or you got to shove waves together or enemy jungler died or whatever. In those cases where you are ahead, it's very easy to just kill the enemy jungle often. So invading is an option now. And the other option that we can play for is ganking until we get Herald up and then try to take Herald and then simply gank top, gank mid, gank bot, whatever, and just herald one of the lanes and take plates. Though top lane is not preferable. The preferable lane to do this on is mid lane, bot lane also fine. Mid lane is preferable if you can get the tower down, because it's going to open up the map, and when this tower is down, then it's very easy for you to walk like this, for example, and get behind bot lane, get into their jungle, or walk like this, or say we walk from bot lane and I don't know, we walk like this and then like this, and the tower doesn't spot us anymore. If you cannot take the tower instantly with Herald, then I would focus on heralding bot lane, because getting your bot lane, especially if they're winning out of lane, is very beneficial. If they're losing, it's still like fine, but mostly you just want to keep both bot lanes in lane if the enemy bot lane is losing, because one, it's going to be easier to kill them, and two, the way that bot lane spreads their influence across the map is taking tower. Okay, we took your tower, and now we go either top or mid, and then after bot lane goes top or mid, suddenly they either take top lane tower if they went top, but the more common approach for bot lanes is to just go mid, and then they stand here and they push out the wave. Your mid laner is unlikely to be able to contest every wave, and if your bot lane is losing, then the issue is going to be that they're still going to get pushed in just like they did in bot lane, and they're slowly losing this tower. But the issue isn't even that you're losing this tower if you are on this side of the map. The issue is that when the enemy bot lane pushes out these waves, they just move everywhere. So now the enemy bot lane gets to abuse their power of ADC and support. So they walk into your jungle, they walk into your river, and the whole map becomes pretty unplayable. But the same thing applies to your bot lane, right? If your bot lane is either even or ahead, and you can somehow take tower, you can put them in mid, suddenly, if, like say in mid lane, they're still not like dominating because say they're even or whatever, you can still gank them or help them or shadow them or whatever. Shadowing meaning that you stand behind them and protect them when you're not busy doing camps, obviously. And you're Evelynn, so you're Invis, so enemy bot lane is less likely to walk up anyway if they don't have a huge lead. So what happens now is your bot lane gets to push out anyway, with your help perhaps, and then you get to have them come with you. So if your support or ADC or both are walking with you like this, and walk into the enemy jungle, you can just take everything and most likely kill the enemy jungler. So this is very useful. So that concludes our early game plan for the most part. Your goals, I guess I would say, are to get at least 2 or 3 kill participation by 10 minutes without dying, preferably get Herald if possible, and then work on getting a tower. The other goal would be something like Rocket Belt, Magi, and Sorks at around 15 minutes, and to get level 11 as soon as possible. And when we get that power spike, those 3 items, and level 11, we will start calling that mid-game. Now, for mid-game, if we move on from early game, we should now have our Rocket Belt or Night Harvester or whatever mythic we went, plus Magi, plus Sorks, and level 11. At this point, our game plan is heavily based around invading, fighting, killing, getting our ult off on cooldown. From level 6 to 11, obviously you want to make plays whenever you have ult, but you want to hold your ult. Now, we want to make sure that we never do anything wasteful with our ult. We have our ult, okay, we can try to force a fight. Because ideally we should be very strong. Obviously if you're not very strong, then you shouldn't force fights too hard. But if our early game plan went fine, then at the moment we should have these options up. Around this time, the second and third dragon should be spawning, depending on if the enemy jungle decided to sacrifice a lot of tempo for the first dragon or not. And if the second dragon is spawning now, then you can contest that, but you can also not. It's up to you really, especially based on laners. If the laners are strong and you're strong, then sure, just take it. Otherwise, if you're the solo carry or whatever, then you're going to want to focus on getting the third dragon rather than the second, because on the third dragon you're normally going to be stronger, and that's around the time when you will have Magi 25 and maybe Rabadons even, if you're very fed, and at that point you can solo carry fights. Your goal now at this point is to become strong enough to kill enemies without ulting. So that is the main thing you're focusing on. You do this by stacking your Magi, by getting more gold, by ganking, fighting, taking enemy camps, and whatever else. This is going to be pretty situational, let's say. But for the most part, it's going to be the thing that I described in the early game, where your ADC and support go mid, you try to make them push, they can move with you, you can fight everywhere, gank, whatever, and your goal at this point is get Magi to 25. If your Magi is 25, you're doing good, and eventually you'll get Providence and you will be very, very strong. If you didn't opt for a build where Providence is your second item, then it might take a bit longer, but if you're very fed, then it won't matter. Now for late game. Late game, ideally, you would have a split pusher. So say your top laner over here would go into bot lane, say Baron is up. Oh, okay, whatever that did. And then your top laner is pushing, and then you would stand like behind them or stand here. Then you try to catch someone on the rotation, so like this. Or if they're, say, like 4-manning your bot laner, maybe you can like fight with him, or well, your top laner is split pusher. Or if they're like 3-manning him, you can turn it, or if the enemy top laner is strong enough to fight, then you can maybe, like, say these guys are top side, right? You can maybe like dive him, you dive, or dive from here, or whatever. And you try to create a man advantage, and then you play for an objective. The most common way to play objectives on Evelynn at this point in the game is going to be for you to look for a pick while your team does the objective, if you're the carry. So say that these guys are here, and enemies say like this still, whatever. You're going to be looking for a pick somewhere here, so that you protect your teammates while they do dragon. If your teammates are also strong, or perhaps even stronger than you can obviously just do dragon as well, because you do have a lot of objective damage. Same thing on Baron. Your teammates are on Baron. If it's needed, you can do a lot of objective damage, but a lot of the time your job is going to end up being something like protecting. So, making a pick here, or just protecting or whatever. Though this will depend on the case by case, because if you have, for example, Xerath or something in mid lane, this guy can also stand here, and if you have good vision, this guy can just poke, you can do the damage to the Baron, and you can secure it, and it's fine. The opposite scenario is when the enemy team is already on it, but here, if you do play Magi, which is the most common way to play it, then mostly it's just going to come down to you being somewhere over here. You look for a blue trinket over the wall, and with your blue trinket, you're going to try to find vision, W the Baron, flash ult, smite, and do 3k, or flash E, ult, smite, and do like 4k or whatever. But either way, this is only going to work if the enemy team decides to do it while you're alive and they don't pink ward over the wall. So yeah, this is... sometimes it's gonna go well, sometimes it's gonna be impossible. Don't overforce it, because if you give 1k shutdown and you also give Magi, it's going to be very bad. That's how you lose the game pretty much. If it's not possible to steal or whatever, it's just, okay, fine. They're probably going to go mid, and when they go mid, you will try to find a pick and a good position. But oftentimes, say that the enemy support is some kind of a tank, right? So you will stand like this, and the enemy support will say walk like this, and they won't see you, because it's not going to be in your vision, in your radius. So you will then stand like this, and say the enemy mid laner is also not killable, right? And then you might find the enemy ADC and jungle like this, and then you can go in between enemies. So this is one concept that you're gonna have to learn in games like these if you want to carry harder, how to get into a good position where you abuse that the enemies don't cut off every flank that you have, because maybe they have a pink here, right? Maybe they have a pink here, maybe they have a pink here. But if you can move well, then you're going to be able to get past them anyway and stand here. And worst case scenario for you is, okay, I guess I'm gonna have to ult, and then I'm gonna have to like hope for the best in my base. But oftentimes it's gonna work out for you. Obviously this depends on how good the players are that you play against. But for beginner to intermediate players, this should pretty much always work. This is also the main reason why Evelynn wants Relentless Hunter. Otherwise you could get away with the other hunters in runes, but this becomes a lot easier. Also mirroring enemy movements. For example, if enemy is standing like this, and you stand like this, and you're just outside of the radius, and you just click on the ground, like very closely, right? So you just try to keep the radius like this, where they just barely can't see you. And then, if they walk up forward a bit, you can walk in and just kill them. That's why it's important for Evelynn players to work on their movement, mirroring, and also to have Relentless, because Relentless will help you do this a lot. Because if you have less movement speed than the enemy team, then you have to predict what they do, while if you have more movement speed, you can actually react to it. And this should conclude everything you need to know for late game on Evelynn, other than how you want to play fights. There are 3 main ways to play fights. The first way is to go front to back, which is something that a lot of Evelynn players refuse to do. This way is fine. It's completely fine to go front to back, especially against champs like Rengar and TF, because these champions are going to reveal you during your flank, and it's just going to be a very bad time for you, because you're most likely going to be forced to ult. That's why against these champions you're often going to end up being front to back, but front to back in general is not too bad on Evelynn. It's really underrated. The second option is to do either front to back or flank, but then you're going to flash in. Here you're going to go for enemy carry champions, either way, whether it be front to back or flanking. And the third way to play is, obviously, as I mentioned before, flanking, right? So you're going to look for some kind of a flank. The flanks are going to be the most consistent when your team is doing very badly, because you get most of the impact and you try to pick off the enemy important character. The flashing on the enemy thing is going to mostly be when enemy has one main carry, and front to back is going to be when your team is doing okay at least, or well. But if your team is doing very badly, then most likely front to back is going to become an issue. But if you have, for example, an ADC that's doing well, but the rest of your team is doing bad, then front to back can become an option anyway. So it is something to consider. I will now try to explain why I went about explaining the items in the way that I did, where you want Medjay, you want Rabadons, you want Sorks, you want a Mythic, I don't know, Mythic, and you want Void Staff. These items are pretty much irreplaceable on Evelynn. Obviously, as I said, Medjay can be replaced for a Shadow Flame, but it's not really a common thing to do, and it's also not the best, and it's a slot anyway. The main issue that Evelynn has with itemization is that you don't have slots. Your slots are locked in. So Sorks, you're not going to skip. Rabadons, you're not going to skip. Mythics, you're not really gonna skip, because there's nothing better to go than Mythics. And then Void Staff is an item that you're going to be forced to go most of the time. So 4 out of 6 items are completely forced. And 1 item just has 2 options, but you're going to need to go one of these 2 options anyway. Because if you go something like Rocket Belt into Lich Bane, you're going to have a really bad curve of power, right? Where you're going to start off really weak because you're not even level 6, and you're gonna get level 6, and then you're gonna get like your Rocket Belt or Harvester or whatever you're getting, your Mythic. Okay, fine. And then after that, you get your Lich Bane, but it just goes like this, like your power isn't really much higher. So then after your Lich Bane, then you get Rabadons, and then you get like a decent amount stronger. But this is not the best way to curve your power level on Evelynn. So say that you still are weak until level 6, and then you get like pretty strong because of 6. Then you get like pretty strong because of Mythic. And then you get like pretty strong because of Magi. And then you get like really strong because of Rabadons. And this is intentional. You are stronger here with 25 Magi and Rabadons than you are with Lich Bane and Rabadons when you don't have Magi. Maybe not by this much, maybe it's like less, but still. This is obviously going to be a better power curve for you because all the time your power is updating. But here your power is really delayed here, where you bought Lich Bane. That's why we don't really want the other items second without going Magi. So, because of that, we're gonna end up going Magi. And with Magi also being locked in as an item, 5 out of our 6 slots are just locked in basically. So since 5 out of 6 slots are locked in, we only have 1 free slot for an item. So now, do we want Lich Bane, which is going to give us a bit of damage? Do we want Banshee, which is going to make the game playable against champions like maybe Poppy, or I don't know, Lee Sin, or Rammus, or Zyra, or Sona, or I don't know, Ashe, or whatever, where these champions can instantly CC us when we show up? Do we really want to be playing around walls where we have to make sure the enemy has no time to react, when we can give them a little bit of reaction time and block their first spell? As long as they can't use 2 spells, we're gonna be fine. So I would prefer to have Banshee here. Most of the time, obviously, not always, because as I said, Lich Bane is also fine. But then the issue becomes the other items, like Zhonya. I can't really think of many situations where Zhonya is better than Banshee. Then items that people don't even build, like Cosmic or Morello or whatever, or Rylai's, these items are going to have a big issue here, because now I just have one item that I don't really know what I want to do with, like Cosmic or Rylai or whatever. While they might not be necessarily bad items, it's not like necessarily they're completely useless, it's just, what do I do with them? What is their purpose? That's why most of your games you're only going to end up with these 2 situational items, because they have some kind of a purpose. And this is also somewhat preference. You can go Banshee more, you can go Lich Bane more, but you're gonna end up buying both at some point. But this is the main dilemma with Evelynn items and why she cannot have more diverse item builds, because she just doesn't have the slots for it. And she also needs to curve her power into mid-game, because if she's not strong mid-game, then you're scaling early game and scaling mid-game, and that's just not a good look on a jungler. For the conclusion, I'm going to try to wrap up by mentioning some of the common tricks on Evelynn, where most of your most of your tricks are based around your stealth, namely getting between enemies, sitting around corners, abusing vision gaps, making enemies waste spells, giving your team vision, so on and so forth. So these tricks are something that you can look into and try to consider. Obviously, these are mostly vision manipulation, but there are some other tricks, like you want to use QW, right, as I showed before, where your W will proc a bit faster. And also learning how to use your Q and E more efficiently, where you want to make sure that whenever the enemies are walking into you, you open with the right spell, and whenever the enemies are walking away from you, you also open with the right spell. So whenever the enemies are walking into you, it is going to be easier for you to open with WQ, I guess. But I mean, you can still open with QW, but the problem is that when the enemies are walking into you, the QW won't actually proc. You're going to have to proc it with the spikes. And whenever the enemies are walking away, you're gonna have to do QW. Because otherwise, if you do WQ, your Q isn't going to reach. An important thing to note is that you want to, if it's possible, at any point in the game, use E before Q. Because E before Q is pretty much going to guarantee you hit your Q, and that means that half of your Q damage isn't going to be missing, because if you miss your first start, then half of your Q's damage is just gone. It also doesn't really slow down your combos, and it's just a fine thing to do. If you have Rocket Belt, then the thing to note with Rocket Belt is that if you are at max stealth range, then Rocket Belt actually makes your combos faster. But if you approach the enemy, so if they're already in range, if they face check you behind the corner, if they're walking into you, if they like jump into you or whatever else, then it actually slows down your combo. So that is something to keep in mind. If you want to combo as quickly as possible, then only use Rocket Belt when you are at max range on your stealth circle. Other than that, the tricks are pretty niche, so one thing I can mention is, for example, that you should stand either behind or next to bushes rather than in them, oftentimes until you see enemies, and then you should stand in the bush, because otherwise they're going to throw spells in and so on, especially against your champion. And that if you see an enemy, then the most important quality that you can have is being patient. If an enemy is walking towards you, then the best thing that you can do oftentimes is just stand behind the nearest wall, and when the enemy walks even closer, you're going to actually get them within your stealth radius and you can instantly combo them. So if you can min-max your stealth usage with little tricks like these, then it's going to be a lot easier to play. If you're here, then you wanted a short rundown of the guide, so I will just tell you this. Go runes like these. This will allow you to scale into mid-game and just do fine. You should go an item build that looks something like this, where you choose a jungle pet, preferably blue. Your first base is going to be something like this, and then this is going to be your core build, where you can use these two situational items, but we just slot them in somewhere over here. Lich Bane after Ravagans only. Banshee can be before Ravagans also. You can also swap the order of these against MR. As for your clear, go for something like a red start into a full clear, or a blue start into full clear. If you are below master, then this should be fine. You can get a leash or do leashless. It's up to you really. You can just ask your bot lane to leash, doesn't really matter. After you finish the clear, either way, you just look at the lanes. If you have any kind of priority, you can contest the scuttle, or you can look for some kind of a gank, perhaps here. I will separate it by color. If you're this side, then you're gonna look for this, or maybe this, and sometimes even this as a gank route. If nothing happens by the time that you take scuttle, then you can just consider recalling and clearing again. And after you do these two camps again, then you look for mid or bot, and you should be fine with that. And if nothing is available still, then just finish your clear and then look for it again. On the other side, after you did your clear, you can look for a gank still, or you can look for a gank here also, if it's possible, or if you have prio, then take the scuttle. But on this side, it's a bit more awkward to take the scuttle, so a lot of the time you're also gonna end up just recalling here, going to base, buying your items, going here, and then looking for a gank or the scuttle or bow. If you're against an aggressive invading jungler, then ward somewhere like this, preferably bow. If you're not against, obviously on this side, if you're not against an aggressive invading jungler, you can hold your wards and then you can place them like this at the end of your clear. If you're against an aggressive invading jungler on this side, then still you may ward like this, but this time you're gonna ward something like this instead for the second ward. You may also, if you decide to go against this and start on top side, then you may also ask for a ward on your buffs. Your game plan, really quickly, will be to do the clears that I just mentioned, and then after these clears are done, you will look to take Herald, and then Herald mid or bot, gank, get to your 3-item power spike, which is Mythic, Magi, Sorks, and then look to use your ult on cooldown. If it's possible, invade. If not, fight enemies in lanes or in river. And once you have 25 Magi, at that point, you look to then buy your second item. And once you buy your item after 25 Magi, aka Rabadon's, Banshee, or Void, at that point, you may contest every dragon and objective that you want, because you should be the strongest person on the map. Dragons usually though are only contested after the second one or third one spawns, but if the first one is free, you can also take that if you want. Thank you for watching. If you learned anything or enjoyed the video, then consider subscribing or liking, or perhaps leaving some feedback, especially if you didn't like some parts of it. I would love to know how to improve it further, and in the future I might consider making guides that are either a more advanced version of an Evelynn guide, which would go into more specific things which are for advanced Evelynn players, or guides for other roles and champions, since I do play every role. And that's about it though. I do also do coaching if anyone would be interested in that, but I'm not gonna link it right now here. In the future, I might also upload coaching VODs or gameplay or whatever else, if that is something that anyone would be interested in. Otherwise, I will leave it at that, I suppose.